immerse your audience. And I think that the performative dimensions of this presentation are just absolutely fantastic. And I'm sort of wondering, like, how do you, in the documentation of this for the thesis book and for your portfolio, capture that? And I'm just putting that out there as a question because I think it's something that, I mean, I felt very uncomfortable
which is exactly what I was going for.
So I think that, I mean, that was very fun to be a participant. I think that, as I've seen today, it seems like many of these thesis projects are quite entrenched in a personal narrative, which part of the reason I've been so silent after your presentation is I'm trying to think of, like, how do I critique something that clearly you're so knowledgeable about, and I guess you've perhaps most of your life have been kind of immersed in understanding the subject matter, and I'm coming to it really for the first time. I think that the theatrics of the, asking Chris to keep turning off and on the lights and the sort of, I mean, I think there's a way that you're in delighting us and entertaining us, but also there's kind of a dimension of, like, I don't know what's going to happen yet, and so that's quite interesting. Now, to get into the nitty-gritty of the actual architecture, I think that this moment, as was mentioned, when you're doing the workshop and you're starting to kind of understand, well, what should this be? I mean, even if you resolve the site plan, if you're starting to think about the unit plans, what sort of identity should this have? And I have a couple, comments, questions and also concerns about that. One of the things that I think would be fantastic is how do you not just end or arrive with these renderings,
right.
but how do you engage, and I know that, now that you've gotten all these clearances, of kind of getting a back and forth, because what I would love to see would be these then with the kind of filter of the comments of what they like and don't like, and this is only 2 views of it, but then how does that evolve over time? And so I think that might be more than just
that's actually what the goal was. It just came down to the installation took longer than we meant to have it take, so I mean it just sounds like an excuse, but that's so yeah. And I had a sharp grip before everybody got here, and then my mom was like,
well, no. I think it's not so much about the presentation. I think it's about the group, the vets.
Right. Okay.
That you did this with. Now that you have this, then you go back. If I'm understanding it correctly.
See, I was understanding more about like the 2 that because I was the one who interpreted the other 2 annotated perspectives. You and I had talked about that originally. Like,
right. But that's not your annotation.
Right.
It's actually taking this back. So it's a second charrette with them.
Yep.
So here were symbols and images and things, and now here's something more concrete, and their critique of that.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely.
The other thing I'm wondering about is, I think what you're really doing here, maybe more so than this being a project that's about an architectural resolution, I think it's really about lifestyle, because I think that you're talking about the role that architecture itself at a variety of scales plays in helping nurture and foster a transition or an assimilation from being on duty, right, to assimilating somehow back into a normative culture. And I don't know that 2 renderings is necessarily going to be able to fully capture that. I think another thing that's a bit of a red flag for me, I mean, obviously we could talk about all the different things that could be happening with materials and 3-dimensional form and to what degree things are setbacks. But I guess there's a little bit of a letdown for me in terms of almost how normative and kind of playing it safe the resolution is because of all the theatricality and unpredictability. And I don't know, I don't have an answer for you in terms of, what that could be. I'm not saying, oh, it should be brick or, oh, it should have a flat roof or a gable. But I'm wondering if there's a dimension of play and perhaps kind of whimsy and unpredictability that could come forth in the architecture that isn't frightening or isn't dangerous. And what would that be? A thought that I had perhaps is if you're talking about a transition, whether this is, whether we're talking about a matter of weeks or months or years, maybe starting to think about this site plan more as being a kind of mechanism or a filter where people sort of arrive at one point, and maybe at varying rates, they start to kind of pass through the development, meaning what might be a few different scenarios. Like maybe one person is only there for a month, another's there for a year, another takes 5 years, but would they live in the same unit the entire time, or is there kind of a notion of like moving somehow from the world of being active in the military to something that's more normative?
Right, okay.
And what does that look like architecturally? I guess for you, it's really a lot of these questions, and I'm trying to think about, is it even fair to ask of you to have resolved it as an architecture? Because I think it's really a performance, it's really like a methodology. And the last comment that I want to make is that, in some regards, I love the fact that you're talking about acoustical, railings of walls, and talking about how to mitigate or eliminate loud sounds. And it's kind of like this, detail of like really zooming in on those moments. But it seems rather underwhelming that it exists really only as a kind of generic plan. Like I feel like this could be, a resort in Hawaii. I mean, and I'm wondering if you could maybe find a way to develop the project where you're thinking about that, not just in terms of, oh, this is an architectural thesis, I need to draw a plan.
Right.
But what might that be in more spatial terms? So maybe even beginning to cut some sections through this, and maybe there are these moments where, once again, I know you don't want to scare occupants, but is there a moment where that soundproof wall, if we were neighbors, could we negotiate and decide, maybe we now want to not have such a private separation? Does the wall pivot? Or are there ways to carve out communal spaces that aren't just designated formally on the site plan as the picnic or barbecue area, but maybe there's ways to kind of be able to have privacy, but at the same time forging, maybe we want to rotate that wall that divides our respective kitchens because we decide that that's a communal dimension that we want to share.
So it's sort of like the question of what is transition? So we talked about this as transition from, but is this just the safe space I come back to when I'm out in the rest of the city and I feel, or is this the space itself that helps me try things and go to a transition, but it's all under my control, because control was one of the things that you said was tremendously important in that. So that idea of that ability to jointly make a decision in a safe space to make change and transition and to open up in a different way, maybe one of those things.
I don't envision this ever going away for me personally. So
the other suggestion that I have, and this is in a way I think very necessary when you're presenting to an audience that's not military or people familiar with what it might be like to live in barracks, to be, in a variety of different, let's say, kind of controlled situations. So whether you're at boot camp, I want to know, what is the architecture or architectures of boot camps? What are the architectures of being on the front line? Because one of the things there that might be helpful, it's a different form of precedent. It's not looking at famous architects. It's looking at the sort of everyday architecture of the military. And maybe there are moments of studying that where you would begin to understand what works well and what doesn't, and what defines privacy, what encourages community. that maybe a series of these like diagrams that analyze those types would then help you in terms of these mixing palettes of like, I want this, or this is not desirable. And I think for me, I don't, other than knowing that maybe these sorts of developments don't exist, I don't really understand, you know, what would be so, let's say, kind of abrupt about moving from that communal environment, you know, of being in military housing to then moving into the normative world of, if it's even normative, of living in a condo or, you know, a bungalow.
So one of those things, and I think part of it is memory and what you feel safe is, so that's for a whole other reason. But one of the things that made, because Sean looked at veterans at different times, and the World War II, that there were troop ships, so they had time to sort of, you know, whereas as opposed to people coming, or at least if I remember what you told me, is they come to the airport, they go into a meeting for an hour, and then they just get dispersed. They don't go back to barracks or things like, so they're all just sort of that's deployment, I mean, that's
the end of a deployment, not so much the military service. And the way that the process when they get out of military service, and I've been struggling with making that a graphic of some sort since the beginning of winter quarter. And the spatial displacement methods in the quarter starts to talk about that, so let me redirect you guys over here. It starts to become a visual aid. It doesn't do it as good of a job as I would have liked to, but I did draw some 10,000 steps. Sorry, it's become a family competition who can get to 10,000 steps before the other people. So one of the things, Chris, will you hold up the other side of this for me? One of the things that you'll see in the non-lifetime military service numbers is specifically case study number 1. I'm supposed to keep it. He's not on my confidential list because he's my witness.
Start celebrating with something.
They're allowed to give themselves away. I'm not allowed to give themselves away. Okay, so case study number 1 was in the Marines from 2002 to 2006. He served 2 tours in Iraq, which you can see here. What I've got, which is harder to discern from further away, is there's a slightly different colored yellow at the end of each deployment, which demarks their travel time. So after deployment, they are typically, they do their thing for however long they do their thing, depending on the branch, it's a little different. And then they have 2 to 3 weeks of acclimation, and usually Kuwait is where everybody did their acclimation from the Iraq wars, where they're supposedly acclimating to a different climate as well as a different experience environment. And then they're home for a month, and they are just like plopped back on their front door. I think one person I talked to from in-country to home was 3 days. Where they had 6 months to a year of training to go to war, to think like a group, to do all of these things. 3 days later, they're put at home. When they get out of the military, completely out of the military, they usually, depending upon the branch, it's all different for branches. It took my brother 2 weeks between getting out of the military, like leaving from in-country to on his doorstep after being released was 2 weeks, which, I mean, I'm just gonna say it's not enough. To be trained and conditioned to think a certain way, to act a certain way, to perceive things a certain way, to rely on people the way that you rely on people, and then just kind of being dumped back in your house or your city or whatever you're being dumped back into without that safety net is absolutely traumatic. And that's probably what's most abrupt. Also, I would say having nobody to talk to about your experiences is also one of the things that's the most abrupt, because when you are in a communal area, whether you're on base with people, I'm going to interrupt myself. Case study number 1 had a medical problem before his 3rd deployment. Okay, Chris had a medical problem before his 3rd deployment. So he was actually kept on base. They said, you can't go, you have to deal with this stuff. And once his whole unit, so he spent, he spent 47 weeks and then 24 weeks on base in 29 homes, training other people to go to war. He first spent time getting his unit ready to go, so he was with all the people he deployed with twice already. getting them ready to go, doing stuff for them, helping them transition into that. And then after they left, he spent the next 24 weeks basically pretending to be a terrorist in training. Are we running?
We're running out of time.
No,
so,
okay.
so
I can talk about this all day.
I know you can. And that's why I felt free to say, but the thing is, the question was, this is a really important piece of data, and your question was graphically, how do you convey?
Right.
So I think in some respects, the sort of book, this is, the final comments in terms of the sense of the research, the process,
Yeah,
the
if I did put that
information.
book together, I have no idea how to do it.
And
So,
if I could make a final comment, I want to say that you did a wonderful job of immersing us in this experience, and I think you made a memorable experience and a statement that I think we'll all take with us. And your architecture and your designs and the things you've been exploring are serving particularly military, formerly military personnel. But there's an architecture to that kind of immersive experience, that promotion of empathy that you gave us to. That might be another area to explore, because although you might not want to draw attention in the same way to this kind of design, this kind of design on an architectural scale could be really significant.
Thank you very much. I would ask you to do this. You've raised these incredible questions. I know you say I've only got these number of days, but I would say that give yourself a year.
Yeah.
Get a really good, go to the New York Times Magazine, get it published, and don't necessarily end with the design,
Right.
but end with the questions about what should the housing be, having presented all the research that you've got.
which is why you did the human subjects.
Right.
Yeah.
Is so that you can publish.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, sorry, but let's close the loop, okay? All right.
Which is a really, I think, beautiful way to end the conversation. I mean, in terms of thesis, there's such a maybe desire to solve a problem, but I think what you've done here and maybe what I was pointing to in terms of the architectural manifestation, not ever presenting this project as being resolved in any one
Right.
way, but that even if you're marking up those renderings and the way that these interior studies, which I just love graphically, but also the kind of style of these comments, whether it's your hand or whether it's comments from, veterans that you've interviewed, I think to somehow leave it as something that's in process and
Yeah.
opening up questions, which is I think a really wonderful way to conceive of thesis, is that it's actually, this is the beginning of a much larger project.
I will say one comment and I'll be done. The way that I presented this to the veterans, trying to engage them and getting their interest in participating with me, was I actually said, there's all of these different aspects to the reintegration process, and I don't think architecture can solve them, but I want to open up the conversation and really start to pay more attention to it, which might enable someone at some point to really make a difference. Not necessarily me, but I want to start the conversation.
Thank you.
Good job. Great.
I never have to come in this basement again.
There you go.
Our last